Hello and welcome to this edition of Storytime at 9. Well, we are back to our regular time at 9 p.m. Now, those of you who've been seeing or following the storytelling that happens every Saturday at 9 p.m. know that 9 p.m. is the regular time in which we go live on our channels on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. It's just that last Saturday was Children's Day in India, and it was also Diwali, right? So because of the festival, we had made a little change and done it at 4 p.m. But otherwise, every Saturday at 9 p.m., we take you to a different country with one of the finest storytellers from that country who kind of introduces his or her country and also tells you stories from that country. And we are very happy that today we are traveling to a country that most of you probably know very little of, the country of Malta. The tiny but very beautiful country of Malta. You know, if you're like me, maybe not you, but maybe your parents, if they're watching this, you know, I love my Roman epics like Gladiator, Troy, and of course Game of Thrones. You know, like it's fantasy, but set in an ancient period. Now, many of them had many of their scenes shot in the beautiful location of Malta, because though it's a small country, it has a beautiful coastline and it has all these ancient, monuments and buildings, which gives it the perfect look for these period epics. So very small, but culturally very rich. And we have one of the finest storytellers from Malta, Giuliana Fenech here. You know, she's going to tell us stories from Malta. You know, Maltese Folktales, of which she's an expert, and in fact, of the Mediterranean as well. She does many interesting things like storytelling for peace. You know, she's trying to bring about a parenting revolution where she is trying to work with parents and how parents can become very good storytellers. Maybe some of that can come in the question and answer session, which follows the storytelling. So, but before we move to Giuliana and her stories, I just want to remind you that every Sunday we also have Robbie Bar Goppa, in which, again at 9 p.m. on the same Bakul Formation channels on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, in which we tell stories in Oriya. And tomorrow we have Saswati Nanda Satpathy, who had been very popular. At the end of today's session, I'll play a little teaser, a trailer video of her storytelling that's going to happen tomorrow. But beyond the storytelling that happens on Saturdays and Sundays, I want to inform you once again that we have started a new program called Bakul Talks, which happens every Tuesday, but not at 9 p.m., at 7 p.m. And and the first series in Bakul Talks that we are discussing is the Nobel Prizes of 2020. So the Nobel Prizes, as all of us know, are the most important prize given for contribution, intellectual contribution, or contribution to mankind in the world. And this Tuesday, we are discussing the Nobel Prize in Literature, which went to a very famous poet, Louis Gluck. And we have one of the finest poets in India, Ranjit Hoskote, who's going to discuss that. And this is not really for small children, but for young adults and adults. So that's enough about the programs lined up this week. But once again, reminding you that if you're watching this on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, please do not forget to like our page or to subscribe to our channel, and please share the video. If you love what you're doing, so that your friends also get to see what fun you are having, and that we will feel good. And I'm sure our storytellers like Giuliana will feel good when you share the videos, because that is the proof that you really loved it. But that's it for now. I'll come back later to talk about more. And over to Giuliana. You please take us to Malta now.
Hello, Sujit, and hello, dearest children. Thank you for this invitation. I'm so happy to be with you today. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about this country that I grew up in, that is so very, very tiny, but has so many stories. Malta has a very rich history. In fact, we have temples that are even older than the pyramids in Egypt. And I know that you've heard of Malta through some famous films, perhaps, or celebrities who like to come here because of our very particular landscape and our very particular culture. But today, I would like to give you a closer look at the stories, the way of life, the way children and grown-ups who live here every day enjoy this country and enjoy the traditions that we have inherited. So the stories that I have chosen for you today are going to share a little bit of daily life because I was born here and I grew up here. And so I want to give you a taste of our everyday life. And the stories I have chosen are very different. One is a traditional story that my parents used to say to me when I was a child. And the other one, the second story I will share with you, is a story that I have written about one of the goddesses called the Sleeping Lady that is very famous and well known, that was found in some of our oldest temples. So are you ready to dive into these stories with me? Let's start. So Malta is a very small country and we have only very small towns and villages. So in Malta, we have a saying, which is that everywhere you go, you will meet somebody that you know. And that is a lovely thing because it's difficult to feel lonely in Malta. You're surrounded by people who know you, who have known you all of your life. But it also means that if you have a reputation, that reputation is very difficult to get rid of. Now, you see, in one of the villages on the outskirts of the island, a village very close to the sea, where people lived in houses that were only 1 story high, okay? And Maltese houses have not a sloping roof, but a flat roof, because it tends to be very hot and it doesn't rain very much and it never ever snows. Well, in one of these houses, there was a little boy who people called Jahan. And Jahan's mother was, like all mothers, very proud of her son. But sometimes he made her a little bit angry because it seems that he could not always understand what she was asking him to do. Jahan, his mother, would say, "Why can't you listen more carefully to the instructions that I give you?" Jahan, his teacher, would say, "Why can't you do as I ask all the children in school to do?" And so poor Jahan, no matter how much he tried to be a good boy, and no matter how much he tried to please his mother and his teacher, it always seemed like they were saying to him that he was not listening carefully enough. Thought Jahan, I must try to do better. And so he had a very good idea. He decided to go around the village and to ask all of the people and the creatures in the village how he could improve his behavior so that both his mother and his teacher would be happy with him and would finally call him a good boy. And so first he approached a cat. Maltese streets are full of cats. Although they live outdoors, we love them very much and we feed them and we take care of them. They're our friends. So Jahan went to one of the cats. He was black through and through. And he said to him, "Mr. Cat, can you tell me why all the grown-ups in my life seem to think that I don't listen hard enough?" Said the cat, "That's for me to know and you to wonder." But he walked off. "Oh no," thought Jahan, "that's not very helpful. That hasn't helped me to understand anything." And so he went to a lizard that was lying just by the pavement near the wall, about to crawl into a tiny crack, and he said to the lizard, "Mr. Lizard, perhaps you, because I've always been nice to you and I've never stepped on your tail like the other boys tend to do, perhaps you could tell me what it is that I can learn, that I can do, so that my mother and my teacher may finally call me a good boy." Said the lizard, I must think long and hard about this. And without giving Jahan a second look, he crept into the hole. That's not useful, thought Jahan. And then, just by the corner of the street, on a bench, was an old man and an old lady, sitting watching the busy grown-ups go about their life and sitting watching the children play. And the old man summoned Jahan and he said to him, "Come here, young man. What is it that is troubling you?" "Well," said Jahan, "no matter how hard I try, it seems that to my mother and to my teacher, I am not a good boy." Said the old man. "How do you know that that is what they think?" "Well," said Jahan, "they are always telling me you don't listen carefully enough." Thought the old man. "Would you like my advice?" "Of course," said Jahan. "That would be fantastic. I've asked the cat, I've asked the lizard, but they wouldn't help me. Please do share your advice." And the old man, who had a twinkle in his eye, pulled Jahan closer and whispered to him, "The trick is this, Jahan. You must do exactly as the grown-ups say. Not what you think they are saying, but exactly listen to every word that leaves their mouth and then follow exactly what each word means." And the old woman sitting next to the old man looked at him with her eyebrows raised really high in her forehead. Jahan thought this was really quite strange, but he didn't know what to make of it, so he thanked the old man and went home. And when he got home, his mom said to him, "Where have you been? I've been waiting for you because you must come and help me to carry the heavy shopping home." "I was out trying to find..." "Enough, Jahan, you and your excuses. I'm tired of them now. Just do as you're told for once." And Jahan decided not to tell his mother because she wasn't listening. So he said, "Okay, Mom, I'll come and help you with the shopping." And she grabbed her bag and she instructed Jahan, "Jahan, get your jacket. Let's go. Come on, pull the door behind you. Let's go." You see, in Maltese, we have a saying which is, "Ijbet il-bib waraik." Ijbet means pull the door, bib, behind you, waraik. In English, this would be translated to, "Please shut the door." But Jahan remembered what the old man on the bench had told him. Listen to each word and do exactly as the adults are telling you. And so as his mom walked down the village street, Jahan took a good look at the door. He was a young man, but he was quite strong. And so he pulled and he pulled and he pulled. And finally, the door came off its hinges, and there he was, walking down the village street, pulling the front door behind him. The old man on the bench laughed. "Look, look!" All the other children in the street shouted. "Look at Jahan! What has he done? He's literally pulling his door behind him." And when Jahan's mother turned around and saw that the son of hers had literally pulled the door behind him, she was furious. "Jahan, can't you ever do as I say?" "But Mummy," said Jahan, "I did exactly as you asked me. You said pull the door, and I did. Look, here it is." And so poor Jahan was left having to stick the door back into its place, and the old woman sitting on the bench made the old man help because, she said to him, "that was not very useful advice. You ended up getting Jahan into more trouble than he had in the first place." So what do you think of Jahana? That's quite a lesson for him. But I tend to feel quite sorry for him as well because he was really, really trying his best. So that's the story. That's one of the stories that my parents used to tell me when I was a child. And the character of Jahan is very popular. And we have lots of different stories related to that. So the moral of the story, of course, is yes, we have to listen to the instructions that we are given, but we also have to use our common sense, because sometimes language can play tricks on us. Of course, Jahan's mother wanted him to close the door so that their house would be safe, but she really did not want him to pull the door off its hinges and carry it right through the village streets. So the second story I would like to share with you is a story that I have written myself about a goddess that is very popular in Maltese folklore. The statue of this goddess was found in temples, as I mentioned earlier, that are even older than the pyramids themselves. And this goddess is called the Sleeping Lady. And the story that I have prepared for you is called The Day the Sleeping Lady Woke. So, the Sleeping Lady was a night creature. Every day at the stroke of midnight, she would wake up, stretch her arms, sit up, and begin to wriggle and shake. She'd begin to sway left and right, and suddenly all of her friends, 7,000 of her friends, would get up and do the same. They would wriggle and shake, they would sway left and right, they would shake their arms, they were dancing. The Sleeping Lady, she loved to dance, and all of her friends would join in the dance, and as they danced, you would hear clickety-clack, clickety-clack, clickety-clack. Because you see, the Sleeping Lady's friends were skeletons. Now, all of the people who lived in the towns and villages surrounding the temples where Sleeping Lady lay, they had no idea that she woke up every day at the stroke of midnight to dance. Because during the day, she would lie on her table and she would sleep from the moment the first rays of sun hit the temple to the moment the sun set. Now, in this town, in this village, very close to the chambers, there lived a boy called Butlet Tash. Now, Butlet Tash was no ordinary child, you see. Butlet Tash was the 13th son of the giant king. This story comes from a time when giants roamed the land and animals were big and they lived roaming freely through the land. Now, Butlet Tash, the 13th son of the giant king, on this day that the story takes place, he had his hands full of fresh mulberry fruit that he had picked from the wild bushes, and he had a very naughty idea in his head. Thought Butlet Tash, I have a very good idea. And sneakily and quietly, he went towards the Sleeping Lady's chambers and down the stairs, because they were underground, and there she was lying on her table. And as he saw her, he decided to squash the mulberries in his hands and wiped the purple mulberry juice all over the Sleeping Lady's face. Thought Butlet Tash, this is so much fun. And he squashed a few more mulberries and he wiped them all across her mouth. She doesn't mind, thought Butlet Tash. After all, she's not a real person. If she were a real person, if she were even alive, she would walk and talk and eat and work just like the rest of us. And Butletash was having so much fun squashing the mulberries and wiping them all over the sleeping lady's face that he didn't even realize he had used up all his mulberries in his way. And then he felt quite tired, and so he decided to go home. He decided to go home and have a rest, and later he would come back to see how the villagers would react to finding the sleeping lady's face all purple. But as Butletash got home and laid his head on the pillow, a very strong wind began to blow. Usually the wind in this place was soft and calm and warm, but on this day the wind was cold and fierce. It seemed almost angry. It howled and blew so that the trees shook and the little birds were blown this way and that, and even the houses began to shake. "What's this?" said the villagers. "Something is wrong." And so hard was the shaking of the houses that they became afraid, and they left and they ran down to the chambers. "Quick, quick," they shouted to one another. "Run down into the chambers where we might be safe." There was so much shouting and chaos that Butletash woke up, and when he looked out of his window to see all of the people running, up he got, and with them he went straight into the chambers. Now, out on the hills, far in the countryside, there was a little girl called Ines, and Ines had been there all morning walking her goat. When she realized that the wind was suddenly furious and angry, she started to pull her goat to take her home. "Come on, little goat, something's wrong with the wind. Let's go home." "Bah!" said the goat. "Come on, goatie, you're such a good goat. Why won't you walk today?" "She's pulling and she's pulling and she's pulling." "Bah!" said the goat. "Oh my goodness, what's wrong with you today?" said Ines. And in a rush to get home and be safe, she picked her little goat up, and as she turned, there, standing on the hill in front of her, bigger than anything she had ever seen, beautiful but also so terrifying, was the sleeping lady. "What?" thought Ines. "What's this? How can it be? How can the sleeping lady be here on the hill? She's never moved. She's never left the chamber." And so frightened was little Ines that she grabbed her goat and ran. She ran straight to the village, noticed that the streets were all empty, and kept going straight into the chambers to see whether it was really the sleeping lady. Now, in the chambers, all of the adults and the children were looking at one another, wondering how it could be that on this day, not only was the wind acting strangely, but also the sleeping lady had disappeared. "How can she be gone?" they asked one another. "What's going on? What's going to happen to us?" When suddenly, in from the door ran Ines with her goat in her hand, shouting, "She's alive! She's alive! Ines, it's not the right time now. We have so many problems today." "No, no, you must listen. She's alive, I tell you." "Who is alive?" "The sleeping lady. I've seen her. She's out on the hill." "The sleeping lady? How did the sleeping lady get out on the hill?" "What's this noise?" they said to one another. There, in a corner at the back of the room, was Butletash rubbing his eyes and crying. "What's the matter, Butletash? Now is not the right time. I'm so sorry." What are you sorry about, Butletash? I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. What didn't you realize, Butletash? I didn't realize that what I would do would create such a big mess. Butletash, what have you done? I got all the mulberries today and I squashed them all over her face. And as soon as Butletash had finished explaining what had happened, the sound of 7,000 whispers was heard in the chambers. Butletash, the whispers say, Butletash, you must fix what you have done. Find the mulberries in the bushes and take them to the sleeping lady when the dawn begins. And Butletash nodded. And Butletash, you must always wanted Butletash to find this ochre, a red clay found in the earth to make this red paint. Butletash, you must find the ochre and then you must paint this chamber in beautiful red spirals. Ooh, cried Butletash. Butletash, said Ines, why are you crying? You've made a mistake, but these voices are telling us how to fix it. Look at my hands, said Butletash. They are too big to make pretty paintings on the wall. Don't worry, Butletash, said Ines, who was a very kind girl. I will help you. Together, if we all help each other, we can fix this problem. And so all of the villagers got together, both children and grown-ups. Some went to look for the mulberries and they carefully collected them. And some went to look for the ochre and they carefully collected it so that Ines could fill the sleeping lady's chamber with these beautiful ochre red spirals. And then, as the first rays of dawn began to break, all of the children, both human and giant, made their way up to the hill. And there, together with the adults, they saw the sleeping lady standing at the top of the hill. She was swaying left and right. They were so afraid. She was beautiful, but she was also the biggest thing they had ever seen. Cautiously they went towards the sleeping lady and laid the mulberries down at her feet and laid the ochre down at her feet. And then as they gently moved back, the sleeping lady began to sway. She lifted her arms high above her head, opened her eyes, and suddenly began to laugh. Look, she said, 7,000 skeletons, all of her friends were making their way up the hill. Clickety-clack, clickety-clack, their bones went as they swayed left and right. Clickety-clack, clickety-clack, as they wriggled and shook. Look, said the sleeping lady, look, you have learned the most precious lesson of all. Not only Butletash, but all of you. You have learned that when the earth gives you fruit, you must not waste it in silly games. You must appreciate it and eat it with joy. And when the earth gives you ochre, you must treasure it and make beautiful things with it. You have learned, Butletash, not to take things for granted. And you have learned that your mischief will only bring you trouble. But when you help others and you work with others to take care of all of the things that are around you, then you will have joy. And the people of the land were so happy at having learned this lesson and so happy at being given a second chance, because you see, over the years they had begun to take so many things for granted. Perhaps the sleeping lady felt that it was time to remind them that all that we are given from Mother Earth, from nature, is a gift that we must protect. And on that day, the people began to sing a song that would always remind them of their promise to the sleeping lady. And I would like to share this song with you so that you may remember this lesson too. May the lady do her sleeping, may the people all stop weeping. May the fair or wild winds blow, and the little seedlings grow. May we always keep our promise for the earth to give us solace. So I hope you liked these two stories, and I'm really looking forward to any questions you may want to ask me about them.
Yeah, sure. So we'll have the question and answer session, but before that, we'll get to know about Malta again from you. But just to tell the viewers once again, if you love the stories, if you love these sessions that are happening, please do not forget to like, subscribe, and to share this video. If you like and subscribe to our channels and pages, then you'll also get the notifications about different programs. Like 2 days back, we had a new program called Travels and Novels, which was not really for small children. Some of you were confused. It was not a Saturday. Why we were doing it? Well, we were requested by the Ministry of External Affairs of the Government of India, and the Prime Minister of India and Luxembourg were having a one-on-one summit for the first time in 20 years, and they requested, can you have a storytelling session on the sidelines of that? But because our story time was already finalized, Giuliana, we had already finalized months in advance that she's going to do on this day. So we kind of curated a new program called Travels and Novels, which is not only for children, which is for adults as well, which was like a meet the author and meet the culture. So similar in that sense, but more like a writer's perspective on it and how the writing of that author has been influenced by the culture. So that's a different program altogether. But this is a running program, a regular program, and something that we feel very happy about. That, if you go back, in fact, to those of you who missed many videos, if you go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Bakul Foundation, you can find actually the previous videos also. Even on Facebook, you'll find them if you go to the video section. So that way, if you miss some countries, you can visit all those countries all over again. And the same with this session. But yes, let us have, maybe you can tell us about Malta, and then we'll move on to the questions.
Yes, so shall I share some images with you so
yes,
that you are able to? Yes.
Please do that.
So just one moment. Let's. Okay. So I'd like to start by showing you a little bit more clearly where Malta is. And what you see here is a map of Europe and Southern Europe and the north of Africa. And there, right in the middle, is Malta. You see, we had to add an arrow and the name, because Malta is so small that the land itself barely even shows on the map. But you can see that it is placed south of Italy. We're right at the tip of Italy and very, very close to Tunisia. And this location is partly why Malta has such a colorful history. In Malta, we also speak our own language. It is called Maltese. It has Semitic roots, but then it was influenced very much by Italian, English, and so on. So Malta is very well known for its beautiful blue sea and its coastline, which to the north and the south and the west is largely rugged cliffs, and then to the east is developed and it's mostly residential areas and so on and touristic areas. But what you see in the picture are the clay slopes and the beautiful blue sea which surrounds all of the island. The weather is very hot in Malta, and so we are lucky enough to enjoy outdoor activities, to enjoy swimming for most of the year. As I mentioned in the story, we have temples that are even older than the pyramids. And I often like to visit these temples and imagine that I am living thousands and thousands of years ago. At spring equinox, when the sun rises, the first rays of sun enter the temple doors and hit the altar. They touch the altar. And this shows us that even in prehistoric times, we had a culture that was very advanced and very developed that could also, in a way, perhaps this was the beginning of the calendar. Okay, so people knew exactly where to position the temple and where to position the door of the temple in order for this to happen. And this is the sleeping lady, the statue that you can actually see if you ever come to Malta, exhibited at the Museum of Archaeology in Valletta, which is our capital city. This is a replica because the original was actually meters high. Here you can see Valletta, our capital city. It's a harbor city which was built by the Knights of St. John and often features in movies because of its beautiful architecture and, of course, proximity to the sea as well. One of our oldest trees on the island is a carob tree, and it is customary in Malta to collect the carobs and make what we call julep, which is a carob syrup that is often used to cure coughs and colds because it's very healthy and very good for you. An interesting creature, an interesting fact, is the two-tailed lizard. Have you ever seen a two-tailed lizard? Well, on the little island of Filfla, part of the group of islands that makes up Malta, we have this two-legged lizard, and his Latin name is Filfolensis. I've also written stories about him, and I think it's quite curious to see and to wonder why this particular lizard has two tails and not one. I thought you would like to see some typical food. This is what we call pastizzi. It's like phyllo pastry filled with cheese, but you can also have it filled with peas or even chicken nowadays. And when it's cold, this is the perfect snack to have with a cup of tea or coffee. If ever you come to Malta, you must make sure to try pastizzi. And in Maltese, our way of saying hello or goodbye is to say saha, which also means good health. So I hope you have enjoyed those images.
Yeah. Well, that's lovely. You know, when I saw, as I was saying, that, the Gladiator and Troy and all of that, I love the landscape. I didn't know then that it was Malta that I was seeing, a lot of Malta that I was seeing, and even in Game of Thrones. And now, of course, of course, the library is closed now, but I hope that now with the situation improving, very soon we should be able to resume the library, the Bakul library where I'm sitting, and images of which you saw in the intro video. Well, we have a book here, which is a travel book to Malta. So you can check that out. Of course, now that you're interested, you can always check out on the internet. But, Giuliana, so there's this young girl who is less than 5 years old, Jivasini, one of our regular viewers. And she first had a problem in figuring out where Malta is. Okay. But then earlier in the afternoon today, she made the skyline of Valletta and sent it
Ah,
across.
look, that's wonderful. Well done.
So which is nice. Yeah, let's have it back. Let's get back. Yeah. So thank you, Jivasini. We are happy that, I'm sure many of you are trying to know more about these countries. As you know, we are traveling, and even before the session and after the session also. So we are very glad to know that. And I'm sure, Giuliana, you must be delighted to see that the child has made the skyline of Valletta.
And it's a very difficult skyline to create because you have the spirals and you have so that's really well done. Super work.
By the way, do you know in Orissa, where we are based, in the state of Orissa, on the east of India, we actually have a sun temple here.
And I didn't know that.
And it is one of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Of course, Malta has many World Heritage Sites of UNESCO.
Yes.
I'm told even Valletta the city itself is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, right?
Yes, it is. And the older capital city, before Valletta, the capital city was Mdina. It's a fortified town. You can look it up. It's Mdina. And it's also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So, yes, in every town and village almost, there is something that is protected. And the interesting thing is that all of these are coming from different periods in history. So literally at every corner, there's a story to be told.
Yeah, I really look forward to, I hope I can visit Malta soon and take walks around the different lanes and the different histories and stories that the stones have to say. So here also, we say that every stone has a story to tell. I think that's true of Malta as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's also interesting to see how you have different superstitions, different myths. So Malta is a very Catholic country, but historically, we also had pagan rituals, pagan traditions. And nowadays, you're able to find out more about all of the different periods and the different cultures and the different lifestyles. And this really interests me. I'm sure it interests the children as well. I'm always asking, how did people live their daily life? Because it's really nice to see the countries in a film, but it's also really nice to learn how people live their everyday life.
Exactly. In fact, that is the whole purpose of this series also, to know about the culture, which is basically the way of life, how people live. So before we go to the questions, just again, as I told you earlier, every Sunday we have Robibar Goppobar, in which we tell stories in Oriya. Here is a little trailer about the storytelling tomorrow by Saswati Nanda Satpathy. So can we see the video now?
Nalla tomato. Hey, khosila doro khosila piajo. Hey, jaha khojibo taha paibo eti mo pakre.
Mosa, goppo achi ki?
Are tame jani na? Bakul pakre achi goppo. Rabbibar goppo sunibar re Rabbibar rati 9টা বেলে 22 তারিখ রবিবার গপ্পবার রে অপেক্ষা করিছি ব্যাকুল মনরে বকুল বনরে শাশ্বতী পিলে ভুলিবনি আসিব ফেসবুক Twitter out YouTube.
So that was in Oriya, my language, the language that we speak. Of course, those of you who do not understand Oriya, you may still check it out of fun. But yeah, that's happening tomorrow, same time, 9 p.m. live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. So now let's go to the questions. Let's see. What questions do we have? So, Giuliana, Tanya from St. Xavier's High School is asking about your favorite writer.
That's a good question. It's difficult to choose one. I think one of my favorite writers remains J.R.R. Tolkien, because when I first read his book, The Lord of the Rings, it showed me that you can create never-ending universes. The idea that you can create not only one story world, but many story worlds. It meant that no matter where I was in the world, I could always be in 10 different worlds in my head, And this year, especially because I couldn't travel as much and I couldn't visit different places and meet different people, I could go into my head and create imaginary meetings and create imaginary places. And then I could share my creations with others. So I think one of my favorite writers is J.R. Tolkien, but there are many. I also used to enjoy reading Enid Blyton's stories when I was a child, for example. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but in Malta, Enid Blyton's stories are very, very popular. And I liked the idea of being in a boarding school with other children, for example.
Enid Blyton is hugely popular in India also. Remember, we were both British colonies. So
Exactly.
we all grew up. There are, of course, many stories that I used to read as a child, which today's children don't read. For example, along with Enid Blyton, I used to read the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew detective fiction. Nowadays, they don't read them as much. But Enid Blyton continues to be very popular. But children, I hope you noted the book that she talked about, Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. So those of you who are very small, the books are a little huge, a little big.
Yeah.
It will take some doing. So if you are unable to read them, you can definitely check out the films right now, and you can definitely move to the books. You can check out the books. If you feel you can read and enjoy, then definitely do that. But if you feel that it's a little difficult for you at this stage, you can always check out the films. But beautiful. And there's a beautiful point that she made about how it has many story worlds within it. It is not just one story world. And that's how we also see our epics, like the Indian epics of Mahabharata, you might have heard of, and Ramayana. So it is story within story within story. So different story universes. I think that is what makes it epical. And I think Lord of the Rings is something, same here. Hare Krishna is asking on similar lines. Is there any Indian author that you've read and that you like?
Right now, none comes to mind right now. But I should have researched this more. In fact, you are right, and I will certainly, after meeting you here, look at this in more detail. But I will say one of the things I love about being a storyteller is that when I listen to other storytellers, they often tell tales from different cultures, different countries. And I find it to be a real gift when I am invited to sit down and simply listen while somebody else is telling a story. So I think one of the beautiful things about traditional storytelling is that we are also taken outside of our culture into a space where it's okay to say, I don't know much about your culture, but I am ready to learn. Because no one knows everything in reality.
Exactly.
So we have to learn from each other. And it's okay to say, teach me about your culture, because I'd like to know more about you and the world you have grown up in.
So here is a task for you. If there are books by Indian authors that you like, children's books, because Giuliana also teaches children's literature, in the university. So unlike the other storytellers that we've had, they are storytellers. Some of them write children's books, but Giuliana tells stories. She writes children's stories, but also teaches children's literature at the university. So I'm sure we would want her to engage with Indian children's literature. Now, the responsibility is yours. So to the children and parents watching this, please mail us at contactbakul. You know our mail ID, contactbakul@gmail.com. Can we see that again? Yeah. Please mail us at this contact. Recommendations for Giuliana, books that you love by Indian authors for children. So, and we will pass on to Giuliana to check them out. So,
yes, please.
Good.
That would be lovely. That would be lovely. You know, part of my work at university is to do research to represent a larger diversity of stories. Because although I live in Malta, unfortunately, for example, we teach very few Maltese writers. I think this is the influence of being a British colony, which still remains with us quite strongly. We are more familiar with British literature for children, with British books, and sometimes we need to work a little bit harder to make sure that we are teaching a wider representation. And that's part of my research. So I will be very, very happy to receive your suggestions, and I will certainly read all of them.
Yeah. So Vishal is asking, Malta, as you presented, seems to be between Africa and Europe and Italy. So is there influence of Africa and Italy, Europe as well? And which languages do you speak?
Okay, that's a really interesting question, Bisha, because Malta, like every other place in the world, is changing very rapidly. And one of the things that we speak of often, I speak about it with the children, I do storytelling with, but also with my students at university, is how we respond to different cultures. Maltese culture has always been influenced by many different cultures around it. Not everybody likes to admit that, and not everybody likes to hear that, but that is the truth. We encourage the amalgamation of culture, so what I mean by that is, even today, we live surrounded by the influence of many different cultures. And I believe we need to embrace and encourage that. So long as we are living next to one another in love and respect for one another and for the place we call home, then it is a very positive thing. You see, growing up, I learned to speak Italian, French, Maltese, and English because Malta has always been multicultural. Our language, Maltese, has Semitic origins. In fact, our alphabet is has Semitic roots. But then, because we were dominated by many different nations, the influence began to change. And today, although we still speak Maltese, many people here also speak English very fluently. An interesting fact is, when I was a child, we had only television in Maltese or Italian. I speak Italian because I would watch my favorite programs on TV. We had no computers and no internet. Today, most children would speak English and Maltese.
Oh, on that line, Justina from Delhi has a question for you. She was asking, who is your favorite author from your own country?
From my own country, I must say my favorite author is Claire Azzopardi. Claire Azzopardi is a writer for children. She has written very sweet books for younger children with pictures and words. So I enjoy watching seeing the beautiful illustrations. And I also love the way in which Claire addresses children through her books. She writes her books with an invitation for us to think about things that we may not have thought about if we didn't read the book. So although I'm a little bit overage, she's writing for younger children, I always feel every time I pick up one of her books that she is writing even for me, because her stories make me think.
Actually, I'm sorry, I got the question wrong. Her question was, which is your favorite story from your own country? So would that be one of those, her stories would be your favorite story from Malta, or one of the folk tales?
To be honest, I think one of my favorite stories is a historical story. It's a story that goes back centuries to the Great Siege. You see, Malta was losing a battle against the Turks who were trying to invade Malta. We had very few resources. And the story says that the Maltese won the battle because the women and children, this is a bit aggressive, but it was a war. So they would climb to the top of the fortifications and actually throw burning oil. Now, the reason why I'm impressed by this story, not because I like stories about fighting or I like stories about war, I don't, but because it shows how people came together to protect what they felt was most valuable to them. And I wish sometimes that we remember this even when our lives are not in danger. Because sometimes when our lives are in danger, a part of us comes out that is a good part. We learn how to protect and defend the things that we love. But what if we protected and defended the things that we love every single day so that nobody has to be hurt to remind us of this very valuable thing? So that, I think, is one of the stories I like most about my country. And also, yes.
Yes, go on.
Also, I had a storytelling session one time for moms and ladies, and one of the participants, it's a personal story, told me how during the war in Malta, during the Second World War, Malta was very heavily bombed, so people suffered a lot. And her grandmother was a young girl, and she would always look for ingredients to bake cakes. She would bake cakes and take them to the soldiers of both sides. Whoever was hungry or needed a bit of comfort would receive some of her cake. And she believed so much that this brought joy and strength that one time, even as the bombs were falling, she took a cake that had just finished baking out of the oven, put her coat on over her house slippers, and ran across the fields with the hot cake in her hand. And as she was running, a bomb fell behind her. Her coat caught fire, but she didn't even realize. She kept running with the cake until the people noticed and they turned the fire off. But for me, that story of the resilience of this woman who was determined to do her little bit to bring comfort to other people. It's a story that really touched me. And I want to acknowledge Florinda Camilleri, who had told this story, and it stayed with me for many years. Stories about courage and strength. I like those stories.
Yeah, interesting. But since you mentioned cakes, Sai Shubham has asked, what is the favorite food in Malta?
Favorite food in Malta. So I very much liked baked pasta. We call it in Malta im'arroon, and that is pasta with a sauce of a tomato sauce, and you can put cheese and onions, and then you bake it in the oven. And I love the smell of that. And then as a sweet, we have something called im'aret, which is dates, the fruit dates that are pressed and covered in pastry, and then they're fried. Not very healthy, but very, very tasty.
Interesting. It's interesting that you mentioned the siege, the Great Siege of Malta. And interestingly, Priyanshu from Mother's Public School seems to have done some research, and he wanted to know how long did that siege last?
Yes, so the siege, well, it's, you see, sometimes it's debatable, but the siege was in 1565, and most history accounts say it lasted from May till September of that year. To be honest with you, so it lasted around 4 months. And of course, at the time we had the knights that had been headquartered in Malta after being driven out of Rhodes, and they were fighting the Ottomans who were trying to take Malta for themselves. So many moments in Maltese history are really about the conflict between the North and the South, if we want to call it that. We're really placed between two continents. And so all of the tension, but also all of the possibility of people coming together, and accepting their differences and finding the things they have in common comes through. So I hope that answers your question. It lasted about 4 months.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm sorry, it's already been 1 hour. We just have a couple of other questions, and I just choose questions relating to the stories. I'm sorry if you have not been able to take your questions, because as you know, there's limited time, and then Giuliana has to move for another session also. So there's Shweta who is asking about the second story, how the 7,000 friends turned to skeleton. She's not clear about that.
That's a really good question, but unfortunately, I don't have the answer, and I'll tell you why. You see, the idea behind the 7,000 skeletons came from history, because when archaeologists found the monument of the sleeping lady, they also found her surrounded by tombs, and inside of these tombs were the 7,000 skeletons. Now, what we think is that these were people who were probably quite noble, so they were people who owned land, or they were people who had some kind of power in society, and they were buried alongside the goddess. So when the archaeologists found the skeletons, it was, you can imagine, a very big find. And I was fascinated by this idea of 7,000 skeletons all next to each other, next to this goddess. And I always wondered what they got up to at night. And that's why I decided to include them in this story.
So Hari is asking why everyone was afraid of the sleeping lady.
Because, they thought that the sleeping lady was made of stone. And I think they also took for granted that she could never move, she could never get up and go elsewhere, she could never speak to them. They had forgotten that everything around us has a past and a story. And so when she woke up, they realized that what they saw in front of them every day was not the full story, there was more to it. And so they were a little bit afraid. But then they realized that, in fact, she just wanted to remind them that as human beings, they needed to respect the natural world around them, and they needed to respect all of the other creatures and beings that exist.
I see. So the last question that I'll take is relating to the first story. Shubham asks, what does John need to do to become a good boy?
What a good question. Children, I think that story is an important lesson for adults. We think that these stories all contain lessons for children. But in the first story that I told you, I think the adults are making it quite impossible for John to be a good boy, because they keep giving him conflicting messages. So I think we need to shift that around and ask, what does his mother need to do to understand her son a little bit better? Because in this story, there is a communication problem between the mother and the son. The mother is always yelling at him, but she's not being very clear about what she expects of him. So perhaps what he can do is try to explain to his mother that he does not really understand her instructions. And maybe she will realize that what they need is to shout a little bit less and talk a little bit more.
So in fact, I would like to tell all of you, so Giuliana, as I mentioned earlier in my introduction of her, she is attempting a kind of parenting revolution, by helping parents become good storytellers. And she does workshops with parents. So if you would want to, so she had reached out to me and I had reached out to some of you, but then I understand there were exams that time. But if you want to be connected with Giuliana and her sessions, again, you contact us, let us know, and we will pass on your contacts to Giuliana to inform you when she does these workshops again with parents, right? Thank you so much, Giuliana. It was wonderful having you, and we got to know so much. Of course, there are more questions, and we can go on. Even another hour would be less, but maybe we'll come back again we'll travel again to Malta, and I don't think you've been to India, right?
Not yet, not yet. It's on my list.
You have to come. You have to come. And you have to visit the Sun Temple here. And of course, the Bakul Library. Don't worry, we'll take you there.
It will be my first stop when I get there.
Thank you so much. So, and as Giuliana taught me today, Saha.
Saha, thank you so much for having me.
Saha.
It's been wonderful to meet you. Saha.
Thank you so much. Bye, and see you tomorrow in Rabibar Gapobar.